22nd series, Porcelain and Volcano. Of course, all life is a process of breaking down. Few phrases resonate in our heads with such a hammer blow. Few texts possess this final character of a masterpiece, or are able to impose silence, or force such terrified acquiescence as Fitzgerald's The Crack-Up. The entire work of Fitzgerald is the unique development of this proposition, in particular, of the of course. Here is a man and a woman. There is a couple. And why couples, if not because it is already a question of movement and of a process defined on the basis of the dyad, who have, as we say, everything it takes to be happy. Looks, charm, riches, superficiality, and lots of talent. And then something happens that shatters them like an old plate or glass. There is a terrible tete-a-tete of the schizophrenic and the alcoholic, unless death takes them both. Is this the notorious self-destruction? What has happened exactly? They have not tried anything special beyond their power, and yet they wake up as if from a battle which has been too much for them, their bodies broken, their muscles strained, their souls dead. A feeling that I was standing at twilight on a deserted range with an empty rifle in my hands and the targets down. No problem set, simply a silence with only the sound of my own breathing. My self-immolation was something sodden dark. In fact, a lot has happened, outside as well as inside. The war, the financial crash, a certain growing older, the depression, illness, the flight of talent. But all these noisy accidents already have their outright effects, and they would not be sufficient in themselves had they not dug their way down to something of a wholly different nature, which, on the contrary, they reveal only at a distance, and when it is too late. The silent crack. Why have we lost peace, love, and health one after the other? There was a silent, imperceptible crack at the surface, a unique surface event. It is as if it were suspended or hovering over itself, flying over its own field. The real difference is not between the inside and the outside, for the crack is neither internal nor external, but is rather at the frontier. It is imperceptible, incorporeal, and ideational. With what happens inside and outside, it has complex relations of interference and interfacing, of syncopated junctions, a pattern of corresponding beats over two different rhythms. Everything noisy happens at the edge of the crack, and would be nothing without it. Conversely, the crack pursues its silent course, changes direction following the lines of least resistance, and extends its web only under the immediate influence of what happens, until sound and silence wed each other intimately and continuously in the shattering and bursting of the end. What this means is that the entire play of the crack has become incarnated in the depth of the body, at the same time that the labor of the inside and the outside has widened the edges. By God, if I ever cracked, I'd try to make the world crack with me. Listen. The world only exists through your apprehension of it, and so it's much better to say that it's not you that's cracked, it's the Grand Canyon. What will we say to a friend who consoled us with these words? This kind of consolation, à l'américain, through projection, doesn't wash for those who know that the crack is no more internal than external, and that its projection to the outside marks no less the end's approach than does the purest introjection. Even if it becomes the crack of the Grand Canyon or of a rock in the Sierra Madre, even if the cosmic images of ravine, mountain, and volcano replace the intimate and familiar porcelain, has anything changed? How can we help but experience an unbearable pity for stones, a petrifying identification? As Malcolm Lowry had a member of another couple say. But granted, it had been split. Was there no way, before total disintegration should set in, of at least saving the severed halves? Oh, but why? By some fanciful geologic thaumaturgy, couldn't the pieces be welded together again? She, Yvonne, longed to heal the cleft rock. She was one of the rocks, and she yearned to save the other, that both might be saved. By a superlapidary effort, she moved herself nearer it, poured out her pleas, her passionate tears, told all her forgiveness. The rock stood unmoved. "That's all very well," it said, "but it happens to be your fault, and as for myself, I propose to disintegrate as I please." Though the association may be close, we have here two elements or two processes which differ in nature. There is the crack which extends its straight, incorporeal, and silent line at the surface, and there are external blows or noisy internal pressures which make it deviate, deepen it, and inscribe or actualize it in the thickness of the body. Are these not the two aspects of death that Blanchot distinguished earlier? Death is event, inseparable from the past and future into which it is divided, never present, an impersonal death, the ungraspable, that which I cannot grasp, for it is not bound to me by any sort of relation, which never comes and towards which I do not go. And then personal death, which occurs and is actualized in the most harsh present, whose extreme horizon is the freedom to die and to be able to risk oneself mortally. We could mention various ways in which the association of the two may be brought about: suicide or madness, the use of drugs or alcohol. Perhaps the last two are the most perfect, because rather than bringing the two lines together in a fatal point, they take time. Nevertheless, there is, in all cases, something illusory. When Blanchot thinks of suicide as the wish to bring about the coincidence of the two faces of death, of prolonging impersonal death by means of the most personal act, he clearly shows the inevitability of this coupling, or of this attempt at coupling. But he tries also to define the illusion. In fact, an entire difference of nature subsists between what is joined together or what is narrowly extended. But this is not where the problem resides. For whom does this difference in nature subsist, if not for the abstract thinker? And how could this thinker, with respect to this problem, not be ridiculous? The two processes differ in nature, so be it. But what can be done so that one process does not naturally and necessarily prolong the other? How could the silent trace of the incorporeal crack at the surface fail to deepen in the thickness of a noisy body? How could the surface gash fail to become a deep Spaltung, and the surface nonsense a nonsense of the depths? If to will is to will the event, how could we not also will its full actualization in a corporeal mixture, subject to this tragic will which presides over all ingestions? If the order of the surface is itself cracked, how could it not itself break up? How is it to be prevented from precipitating destruction, even if this meant losing all accompanying benefits, the organization of language and even life itself? How could we not reach the point at which we can only spell letter by letter and cry out in a sort of schizophrenic depth, but no longer speak at all? If there is a crack at the surface, how can we prevent deep life from becoming a demolition job and prevent it from becoming it as a matter of course? Is it possible to maintain the inherence of the incorporeal crack while taking care not to bring it into existence and not to incarnate it in the depth of the body? More precisely, is it possible to limit ourselves to the counter-actualization of an event, to the actor's or dancer's simple, flat representation, while taking care to prevent the full actualization which characterizes the victim or the true patient? All those questions point out the ridiculousness of the thinker. Yes, there are always two aspects, and the two processes differ in nature. But when Bousquet speaks of the wound's eternal truth, it is in the name of a personal and abominable wound which he bears within his body. When Fitzgerald or Lowry speak of the incorporeal metaphysical crack, and find in it the locus as well as the obstacle of their thought, its source as well as its drying up, sense and nonsense, they speak with all the gallons of alcohol they have drunk, which have actualized the crack in the body. When Artaud speaks of the erosion of thought as something both essential and accidental, a radical impotence and nevertheless a great power, it is already from the bottom of schizophrenia. Each one risked something and went as far as possible in taking this risk. Each one drew from it an irrepressible right. What is left for the abstract thinker once she has given advice of wisdom and distinction? Well then, are we to speak always about Bousquet's wound, about Fitzgerald's and Lowry's alcoholism, Nietzsche's and Artaud's madness, while remaining on the shore? Are we to become the professionals who give talks on these topics? Are we to wish only that those who have been struck down do not abuse themselves too much? Are we to take up collections and create special journal issues? Or should we go a short way further to see for ourselves, be a little alcoholic, a little crazy, a little suicidal, a little of a gorilla, just enough to extend the crack, but not enough to deepen it irremediably? Wherever we turn, everything seems dismal. Indeed, how are we to stay at the surface without staying on the shore? How do we save ourselves by saving the surface and every surface organization, including language and life? How is this politics, this full guerrilla warfare, to be attained? How much we have yet to learn from Stoicism. Alcoholism does not seem to be a search for pleasure, but a search for an effect which consists mainly in an extraordinary hardening of the present. One lives in two times, at two moments at once, but not at all in the Proustian manner. The other moment may refer to projects as much as to memories of sober life. It nevertheless exists in an entirely different and profoundly modified way, held fast inside the hardened present which surrounds it like a tender pimple surrounded by indurate flesh. In this soft center of the other moment, the alcoholic may identify himself with the objects of his love, or the objects of his horror and compassion, whereas the lived and willed hardness of the present moment permits him to hold reality at a distance. The alcoholic does not like this rigidity which overtakes him any less than the softness that it surrounds and conceals. One of the moments is inside the other, and the present is hardened and tetanized. To this extent, only in order to invest this soft point which is ready to burst. The two simultaneous moments are strangely organized. The alcoholic does not live at all in the imperfect or the future. The alcoholic has only a past perfect, passé composé, albeit a very special one. In drunkenness, the alcoholic puts together an imaginary past, as if the softness of the past participle came to be combined with the hardness of the present auxiliary. I have loved, I have done, I have seen. The conjunction of the two moments is expressed here, as much as the manner in which the alcoholic experiences one in the other, as one enjoys a manic omnipotence. Here the past perfect does not at all express a distance or a completion. The present moment belongs to the verb to have, whereas all being is past in the other simultaneous moment, the moment of participation and of the identification of the participle. But what a strange, almost unbearable tension there is here. This embrace, this manner in which the present surrounds, invests, and encloses the other moment. The present has become a circle of crystal or of granite, formed about a soft core, a core of lava, of liquid or viscous glass. This tension, however, is unraveled for the sake of something else. For it behooves the past perfect to become an I have drunk, j'ai bu. The present moment is no longer that of the alcoholic effect, but that of the effect of the effect. The other moment now indifferently embraces the near past, the moment when I was drinking, the system of imaginary identifications concealed by this near past, and the real element of the more or less distanced sober past. In this way, the induration of the present has changed its meaning entirely. In its hardness, the present has lost its hold and faded. It no longer encloses anything. It rather distances every aspect of the other moment. We could say that the near past, as well as the past of identifications which is constituted in it, and finally the sober past which supplied the material, have all fled with outstretched wings. We could say that all these are equally far off, maintained at a distance in the generalized expansion of this faded present, and in the new rigidity of this new present in an expanding desert. The past perfect of the first effect is replaced by the lone "I have drunk" of the second, wherein the present auxiliary expresses only the infinite distance of every participle and every participation. The hardening of the present, "I have," is now related to an effect of the flight of the past, drunk. Everything culminates in a has-been. This effect of the flight of the past, this loss of the object in every sense and direction, constitutes the depressive aspect of alcoholism. And it is perhaps this effect of flight that yields the greatest force in Fitzgerald's work, and that which expresses it most deeply. It is curious that Fitzgerald rarely, if ever, presents his characters in the act of drinking or looking for a drink. He does not live alcoholism as a lack or a need. Perhaps this is discretion on his part, or he has always been able to have a drink, or there are several forms of alcoholism, one of them turned toward its most recent past. The case of Lowry, though, is the opposite. But when alcoholism is experienced as such an acute need, a no less profound deformation of time appears. This time, every future is experienced as a future perfect, futur intérieur, with an extraordinary precipitation of this compound future, an effect of the effect which goes on until death. Alcoholism, for Fitzgerald's characters, is a process of demolition even to the extent that it determines the effect of flight of the past. Not only the sober past from which they are separated, my God, drunk for 10 years, but also the near past in which they have just been drinking, and the fantastic past of the first effect. Everything has become equally remote and determines the necessity of drinking anew, or rather of having drunk anew, in order to triumph over this hardened and faded present, which alone subsists and signifies death. It is in this regard that alcoholism is exemplary. For other events, in their own way, can bring about this alcohol effect. Loss of money, for example, love, the loss of our native country, or the loss of success. They do so independently of alcohol and in an external way, but they resemble the way of alcohol. Fitzgerald, for example, experiences money as an "I have been rich," which separates him from the moment at which he was not yet rich, from the moment at which he became rich, and from the identifications with the true rich to which he used to apply himself. Take, for instance, Gatsby's great love scene. At the very moment he loves and is loved, Gatsby, in his stupefying sentimentality, behaves as if intoxicated. He hardens this present with all of his might and wishes to bring it to enclose the most tender identification, namely that with the past perfect in which we would have been loved absolutely, exclusively, and without rival by the same woman. 5 years absence like 10 years drunkenness. It is at this summit of identification, Fitzgerald said of it that it was equivalent to the death of all realization, that Gatsby breaks like a glass, that he loses everything, his recent love, his old love, and his fantastic love. What gives alcoholism an exemplary value, however, among all these events of the same type, is that alcohol is at once love and the loss of love, money and the loss of money, the native land and its loss. It is at once object, loss of object, and the law governing this loss within an orchestrated process of demolition. Of course. The problem of knowing whether we can prevent the crack from being incarnated and actualized in the body in a certain form is obviously not subject to general rules. Crack remains a word as long as the body is not compromised by it, as long as the liver and brain, the organs, do not present the lines in accordance with which the future is told, and which themselves foretell the future. If one asks why health does not suffice, why the crack is desirable, it is perhaps because only by means of the crack, and at its edges, thought occurs. that anything that is good and great in humanity enters and exits through it, in people ready to destroy themselves. Better death than the health which we are given. Is there some other health, like a body surviving as long as possible its scar, like Lowry dreaming of rewriting a crack-up which would end happily, and never giving up the idea of a new vital conquest? It is true that the crack is nothing if it does not compromise the body, but it does not cease being and having a value when it intertwines its line with the other line, inside the body. We cannot foresee. We must take risks and endure the longest possible time. We must not lose sight of grand health. The eternal truth of the event is grasped only if the event is also inscribed in the flesh. But each time we must double this painful actualization by a counter-actualization which limits, moves, and transfigures it. We must accompany ourselves, first in order to survive, but then even when we die. Counter-actualization is nothing. It belongs to a buffoon when it operates alone and pretends to have the value of what could have happened. But to be the mime of what effectively occurs, to double the actualization with a counter-actualization, the identification with a distance, like the true actor and dancer, is to give to the truth of the event the only chance of not being confused with its inevitable actualization. It is to give to the crack the chance of flying over its own incorporeal surface area without stopping at the bursting within each body. It is, finally, to give us the chance to go farther than we would have believed possible. To the extent that the pure event is each time imprisoned forever in its actualization, counter-actualization liberates it, always for other times. We cannot give up the hope that the effects of drugs and alcohol, their revelations, will be able to be relived and recovered for their own sake at the surface of the world, independently of the use of those substances, provided that the techniques of social alienation which determine this use are reversed into revolutionary means of exploration. Burroughs wrote some strange pages on this point, which attest to this quest for the great health, our own manner of being pious. Imagine that everything that can be attained by chemical means is accessible by other paths. A strafing of the surface in order to transmute the stabbing of bodies. Oh, psychedelia.